welcome you guys to another episode of The Common Theory. I'm your host, Chris, along with my man, Dallas, and today we have a very special episode for you guys. I'm very excited to bring a friend of mine on the show, and I think this has been a long time coming because we have, well, you know what? Let me just have him introduce himself, and his name is Fyndhorn Brownie. And Fyndhorn, please take the floor. I don't want to take any more time, and just tell us who you are, my man. Like, hit us with it.
Yeah. Well, I've been playing Magic for, well, that's kind of a complicated story. I started in 95. I was at a summer camp with some friends, and a bunch of them had these cards, and they were green, and they were black, and they were white, and they were like turning them sideways and things like that. I'm like, what is happening? And they're like, this is Magic. And I was like, I have no idea what this is. And so I went to the store and I bought a starter deck of Ice Age. And I bought, back when starter decks were a thing, it's not even a thing anymore, and bought a bunch of cards, took them home. One of the first things I opened was a booster pack, and one of the first cards I saw was Fyndhorn Sky Knight, with like the old Mark Poole art with like a knight with a huge like jousting sword.
Oh, the old
flying on this bird. And I was like, what even is this? And I thought it was the coolest thing I had ever seen, right? Got into Magic there for several years, played from about 95 till about 2003. I never played professionally in any way. Didn't even really do like local tournaments and stuff, just played with friends, played with other people I knew who played Magic. So I guess you could call me a kitchen table player. One of the scariest things to me back in the day was somebody dropping a Royal Assassin and an Icy Manipulator. For the old heads that know that combo. We call it a combo. I'd get my Sarah Angel, be like, all right, let's go. And they'd be like, oh, Royal Assassin, Icy Manipulator. Oh, no.
Those were good days. Those were good days. Those were good days.
And one of my favorite times in Magic was Mercadian Masks block. And actually, given some of what we'll talk today, a lot of those cards are going to come up, and I love playing them. But at any rate, I actually stopped playing just because of life circumstances around 2003, 2004. And then didn't really even think much about Magic until about 2020. A bunch of my collection had went missing. I don't know where it went. My brother was cleaning out my grandmother's attic and came across a box of Magic cards and just sent them to me. And I had a bunch of these old kitchen table decks that I had, like some Goblin decks and some blue control, and this old white deck I used to play with, which was made up of like Standing Troops and Banalish Trapper and Sarah Angel and Armageddon and all this stuff. And I thought they were really neat, but I didn't really know what to do with them. And then my daughter one day found them, and she's like, what are these, Dad? And so I show her how to play Magic, and next thing I know, I'm playing it again. Didn't even know you could buy singles. Still thought Mana Burn was around. Somebody had to explain to me that wasn't a thing anymore.
I remember when that changed.
Right? Bought a box of like Kaldheim cards. Fell in love with that set. Still play a bunch of the commanders from that set. Love Kaldheim. And then I think as a result of kind of investigating a lot of the uncommons from that set, which I just kind of looked at and I was like, these cards are amazing. And like, I'm processing them through like early Magic standards, right? So like when I look, like I have it next to me, like when I have like Maya, Bredegar Protector, I look at this card. I'm like, this thing is insane. How is this not like one of the most powerful cards in Magic? And I just like couldn't wrap my brain around it. And then I found out that there was a format called Pauper Commander, where a lot of these commanders get a lot of play. That they're not maybe as popular in EDH, but they're very common in this format. I sort of found that just by doing Google searches and this, that, or the other. Found some content creators, the PDH pals. Joined their live stream one day just to watch them review a set, and I needed to sign into Twitch. Like I didn't even have like a Twitch account. I had to sign into Twitch, and it was like you just need to come up with a name. And I'm like, what was the silliest common from back in the day that I can remember? And I was like, oh, Fyndhorn Brownie. The art on that card was like ridiculous, and it's like a ridiculous card. Fine, I'll just be Fyndhorn Brownie.
It was an actual brownie. It was an actual brownie. It was an actual brownie. I got into an argument. For the record, I got into an argument like a year and a half ago with some people about that card. I was like, no, its creature type is brownie. Yeah. I did not know Wizards changed it, and I bet money on that, and I was like, no, it says brownie on the card, and and then they got me because I was like, no, well, it says brownie, and we had this the argument about it, but it was still funny. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so and I noticed that too. They changed them all the oofs. There's like only a few of them. So I went ahead and joined their live stream, and then ended up in the Discords, and then that name just kind of stuck. So I stuck with it, even though it's a green card, and like my interests kind of fall more on the white and blue kind of frame. I've noticed now coming back to Magic, in some ways gotten in touch with my roots with Magic. In early Magic, I really liked playing white. I liked playing blue, and so I kind of just stuck with that. Like even when I go to drafts or I go to like pre-releases, I've just found that like I end up gravitating in the card pool towards white or blue or Azorius. It just kind of is what happens, and it seems to be kind of how I best approach the game. Having said all of that, coming back to the game and trying to get a handle on like what it is now. Talked with some players and talked specifically about like, hey, I used to love playing white back in the day, like white aggro and white mid-range, things like that. Is that still a thing? And almost universally got told like no. And I know we're going to get more into mono white as we go on, but we're sort of told like mono white is not really a thing anymore. It's not really strong. And I was like, oh, really? But I was talking a lot to commander players, and I think that's an important context. A lot of commander players, first of all, don't play a lot of monocolor. But then also too, and that's not criticism. I mean, if you have a bunch of different like colors that you can play with and can just pull out of your collection, why wouldn't you? But then also a lot of players kind of had these notions from going back to a few years back in Magic's history where, right or wrong, it felt like for commander, white cards were maybe not as strong as some of the other options. Wizards has done a lot to work on that, and especially a lot at the common level, which we can get into later. But I kind of was like, oh, I don't know that I want to believe that. So I kind of put some work into trying to make mono white work, and talking in some of the Discord servers where we hang out, and really found rekindled a love for it from those early days when I played Magic as a kid. So that's kind of my history in Magic and in Pauper. I played some Pauper 60 card, and when I did, not surprisingly, I played mono white heroic. Had some great times, had some rough games, but it was a good time. And hopefully I can get back to that again soon, because we have at my LGS for a while, we had a pretty good 60 card community. Now we're trying to see if we can get some Pauper Commander going, so I'm especially excited about that.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic, my man. That was, yeah. I think everybody kind of got to know you a little bit better with that, and I'd like to actually touch upon our next subject, which I will say, I think our man Puzzle here will have a little bit of feedback with these next notions, good or bad, but we'll see. And the next part of this is the philosophy behind Pauper in this format. So I want to make sure that you guys know that we're specifically talking about Pauper. Now, even though we may use a few examples here and there, the examples are relatable to everyone. So it makes it easier for us to explain it. But at the end of the day, we are going to try to hammer home as best as possible Pauper itself. So, but Fyndhorn, take us away, my man.
All right, so we talking Stax?
If that's what you would like to talk.
Do it.
If that's what wait, what?
Let's talk Stax.
Let's talk Stax. So Stax is an interesting subject. So I'm going to start with this to give a context for why we're even having the conversation. there isn't really much of a conversation that needs to happen around, is combo a thing in Pauper Commander? It's pretty well known that, there are combos that can happen even in 60 card Pauper. There are combos that have happened in the past, could still happen. Not much of a case needs to be made for mid-range. For a while, aggro, there kind of was a discussion about that, and that discussion kind of came to a head with decks like Gut Leader, and Gut Leader showed some really great results. And so now it's kind of accepted that aggro is a archetype in our format. But for a long time, one of the things I heard is that Stax is not an archetype in our format. And that the reason it's not an archetype in our format is because the effects that can be called Stax exist at rarities that are not available to our format. And so therefore, Stax is not something that you can do in Pauper. My contention, and I'm not the first one to bring this up, but I think maybe I'm the most stubborn about it, which is just kind of part of my personality, is that no, Stax is something that is available in Pauper. Just as the kinds of combos and the way we do aggro and the way that we do mid-range looks different from other formats. It looks different, for example, from what happens in EDH or cEDH. We still have it here in our format. It's going to be scaled to the kinds of effects that happen in our format and to the kinds of ways that people want to try to win the game and the way that Stax is going to disrupt it. Now, I should back up for a moment and even just explain what I mean about what Stax is, because you may be looking at that and going, Stax, well yeah, of course Stax doesn't exist. It's
Fyndhorn, if I could hit you with a quick caveat here on that, just to elaborate just a tidbit. I think what you were saying there, to simplify it for everybody here, just because it doesn't look one way in this format doesn't mean it isn't that in our format, right? I think that's like kind of like the sum of what you were saying. It's just an easier way to hear that, right?
Just because it doesn't look like Stax over there doesn't mean it's Stax here.
Yeah.
I 100%. And I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. Stax does exist in our format. It just looks different. When I say Stax, I'm referring to an archetype that falls under control. And I think that's important to mention too, because some folks will say, well, you're just talking about control. And it's like, well, yes, I am talking about control. But it's a form of control that is not as interested in playing control on the stack as much as it is preemptively putting into play permanents that are going to deny resources to my opponents or limit the game actions that they can take. Another way that I like to put it is that I want to play cards that force my opponents to play fair Magic. And I mean that kind of like sarcastically, like obviously combo is a fair way to play Magic, right? Like aggro is a fair way to play Magic. I'm just saying the kinds of busted things that win the game, I'm going to try to disrupt those through the permanents that I'm going to play. Am I only playing permanents? No. I'm going to play some instants. I'm going to play some things that are going to disrupt on the stack, but that's not the primary strategy. Like I'm not taking a blue approach and focusing on counter spells and bounce and things like that. I'm focusing more on effects that set rules on the table or that fog out a combat in a format where combat is really important for a variety of decks, or that are going to fog damage or life drain a format where that matters.
Would you have an example of a card that you could give with that example specifically? Do you have a card that you could say that fits that fog effect or something along those lines?
So the first one that comes to mind for me is Kami the False Hope. So Kami the False Hope is 1 white for a spirit, I believe. You put it into play and it just says sacrifice Kami of False Hope, prevent all combat damage this turn. So Kami of False Hope, you put that into play, you've spent 1 mana. And this has happened in games that I've played in cPDH. And everybody kind of goes, oh. And they kind of think to themselves, oh, it's just like a little 1/1. It's like, okay. But if you're up against, let's say, Zada Hedron Grinder, who wants to take one combat and try to alpha strike the table. So Kami the False Hope is going to disrupt that. You're saying to your opponent, you have to waste a combat step. You have to waste damage that you want to send at me, because I'm going to crack this Kami, and it's going to disrupt your plan. And all I've done is just put it into play and let it sit there. That's probably the number one I would point to. Other effects that do this. The reality is that in our format, a lot of people play creature-based flicker combos or persist combos to close the game. So at some point, they're going to attempt to win by taking your creature out of play, putting it back in. Whether that's Abdel, whether that's a Peregrine Drake combo, whether it's a persist combo in Rakdos with goblins, let's say. Other colors, of course, have that. You can see it in green. You could see Presence of Gond, Midnight Guard combo. At some point, they're going to be just trying to overwhelm the board, either with Flicker or with creatures entering the battlefield. A Suture Priest disrupts that. So a Suture Priest says, and at least as part of it, that whenever a creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, you may have that opponent lose one life. So if I put that into play, and I'm essentially saying, if you want to combo, you have to deal with this card that I've put into play, because I've now set a rule that if you put a creature into play, I'm going to make you lose a life. That is another great example.
So let me hit you with this one. I think that's a perfect segue to our main Dallas here, which is we will say, I'm going to throw this out there. He has recently moved to a new destination, and we're having a few little bit of internet problems. So we apologize for that. So we're going to put some super cool card down there for him throughout this. But I know you have some thoughts about this, my man. Please send it, please.
All right. So first topic, Kami of the Pulsar. I struggle to call that a Stax effect so much as just a delayed version of just a fog effect. Like, I've been playing Aether Spellbomb for 2 years. That card's busted.
Yeah.
And I think those effects are amazing because, you're not casting them. They can't be counterspelled at the time you're activating them. Obviously, they can be counterspelled before that.
Sure.
But the things that sit on the board and have these abilities are very powerful, but I struggle to call them Stax effects so much as I just see them as a delayed version of whatever their original effect is. So for Aether Spellbomb, it's just a bounce spell to me, except it's uncounterable once it has hit the board. Kami is an uncounterable fog once it's in play. Things of that nature. I don't really see them as Stax effects so much as just an augmentation of another effect.
Would you refer to them, generally speaking, as control effects?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll go back to what my definition is. So when I talk about stacks specifically for this format, I'm talking about pieces that you're putting into play that are going to control the board that are based in permanence. So that's my definition of stacks. So it's never going to lock out an opponent. So going back to my example of Zada can just decide to crack into it. The difference is that Zada is trying to end the game at that point or delete a player at that point. And I'm going to say to them, no. I'm doing that with a permanent that's on board that unless they deal with it first, they're not going to get the intended outcome of their game actions. So it's a game action restriction in the sense that they have to take the game action, but when they do, they're not going to get the desired outcome. So I would refer to that as a stacks piece.
Yeah, so I just don't necessarily think that that's stacks the way I see it. I still just see that as control, just a different form of it, which I understand is basically what you're saying stacks is in the format. But for me, stacks the way I have seen Stax, especially in multiplayer formats, is just the hard Stax definition, where it's like, I am exactly limiting these game actions, be it with rule of law effects, where it hard limits one spell a turn, or Curse Totem, you cannot activate creature abilities. And even though we don't have those effects at common, I think it's possible that we could, but that's still the way that I define Stax.
So I'd like to throw a little caveat at you, Puzzle. What reference is that directed towards? Like, in your experience, what are you using as the reference point?
For me, in terms of my definition of Stax,
correct.
As for the format, I'm talking about Commander. Above Pauper Commander, just Commander.
Yeah, generally, like, because you were using rares and stuff like that, like Curse Totem and whatnot. So I just wanted to make sure that was a known fact, that you're using a different tech. So we're the same format as a whole, but we're using different rarity of cards.
Right.
Yeah, different.
So getting to your example, so I would say, and I see your point, what you're referring to are what I would say are commanding stacks. And I'll take a moment to explain what I mean by that. Charles Zhuang, who is a top 4 player who in the Marchesa tournament last year, and has done a lot for mono white stacks, and has taught me quite a bit, not directly, but through what their content that they've put out in podcasts and Twitter, has a document on stacks, refers to a couple different forms of stacks. Commanding stacks is one of them. So commanding stacks would be those pieces that are setting rules that are like really restrictive. Like when you're feeling like, I'm getting locked out, I can't do anything. That's a commanding stacks. But there's other forms of stacksing as well. There are preemptive stacks. So those would be things that are like specific meta calls, let's say. So an example of this would be a preemptive stacks, and in some ways this can function like a commanding stacks, would be something like Standard Bearer. The Standard Bearer says, and it's a complicated text, so I'm not going to get it quite right, but basically what it says is, if an opponent plays a spell that could target a creature, and it could target Standard Bearer, they have to target Standard Bearer. So that's a preemptive stacks in the sense that I've put that into play in order to deal with specific issues that come up in our format. I shouldn't say issues, but problems. So, for example, if somebody wants to freed from the real loop, which is something I do in Avalanche Caller. I know you do it in Gretchen. There are other decks in the format that do that. You have to deal with the Standard Bearer first in order to do that specific combo line. So I call that a preemptive stacks because I'm putting it into the list to deal with specific problems. And it's, again, based in a permanent that's on board. Is it going to lock out Gretchen? No. But that's not really the point. The point is you have to deal with this first. Our format is going to be different from Commander in the sense that in EDH, there are higher rarity, higher power cards that can both just overwhelm the game. I mean, can win on turn 0, that we just don't have available here. So kinds of cards that are going to win the game and the kinds of cards that are going to answer them are going to look different. So that's preemptive stacksing. Then there's suggestive stacksing, and suggestive stacksing comes in the form of things like Whipgrass Entangler. So Whipgrass Entangler has an activated ability. It is a cleric, and that matters. But Whipgrass Entangler says if you pay 1 and a white, you give another creature the ability, this creature cannot attack or block unless its opponent pays, I don't actually remember the amount right now, but I think they can choose to take that action. But then I've shut down any other actions they can take that turn because they're probably tapping out, let's be honest. So it's a suggestive stacks, and they can choose to do it or not. Those are still considered stacks. They're just not your, like you mentioned, Curse Totem, or they're not like your Smokestacks or Grafdigger's Cage or things like that. They're not going to be those really heavy effects that just lock people out from playing the game. So just as we have a different form of interaction here in our format. I think the way that permanence-based control, which again is what I call Stax, is going to look a lot different, and how it answers the things that come up in our format is going to look different.
Yeah, that's fair. Generally, let's see. I still think that I personally don't want to use the term stacks, because I do see hard Stax pieces coming into the format at some point, mainly, especially in the command zone, as we've seen with cards like Phyrexian Censor, where we do get access to those hard Stax pieces. And that's something that I'm willing to at least start calling a Stax deck. Whereas the soft Stax pieces, I still see just calling them control pieces seems adequate enough from my perspective.
Yeah, well, and I've also said elsewhere in these discussions, like, I'm also comfortable with calling it death and taxes, because a lot of these effects look very similar to legacy death and taxes. In that you're taxing your opponents, you're putting permanents on board that are making it harder for them to advance their game plan so that you can get an advantage over them. And that's a perfectly fine way to put it. The reason I refer to it as stacks is because, and I think it's just a matter of how people have interacted with someone having a stacks deck before. It seems to be the most relatable, because if you don't have any like experience in legacy or that particular deck, death and taxes to me seems like more of a remote way to refer to what I'm doing than Stax does. But if somebody said, well, I'm fine calling it control, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. I refer to it as Stax because, on the flip side, I think when a lot of people think control, they're usually thinking stack interaction. So when I'm doing stacks, stack versus stacks, right? I'm not always trying to manipulate the stack or have a stack war with you. What I'm doing is putting permanents into play that are then making you have to pivot and play around them. So that's why I use that terminology. Now, as our card pool changes, it may be that's, like you said, certain softer stacks pieces. Maybe we could say, okay, well, these are more control than stacks. But I still think that there's a space to call it stacks. Really, the point I'm trying to get at is that the way, and this is important to mention, that white wants to play control or stacks looks a little bit different than the way other colors want to, or other color pairings want to.
Well, I think that's a great little caveat. Sorry to interrupt you too, but we have to do our deck of the week puzzle. We're at our midway point. Like we got to get to this, and I actually think it's your turn.
Well, I think.
But yeah, I think it's your turn. But we do have a special guest today, so I think we're going to throw the floor at him unless he doesn't want to. It's kind of one of those things, but I definitely... Now, how about this one? I know he's going to take the floor for this one. So, Fyndhorn, bro, hit me, or should I say, I think this is going to be our most controversial part of the episode. So, I don't know if anybody is not seatbelted in, but put on your seatbelt. And please introduce your deck of the week, Fyndhorn.
Yep. So I would like to introduce Phyrexian Censor. So Phyrexian Censor is the second rule of law effect that we have gotten at Uncommon. The first was Eidolon of Rhetoric. This one, though, I think is a little bit more of a powerful effect, because it has some additional things going on. So Phyrexian Censor is 2 and a white for a 3/3 Phyrexian Wizard, and it says each player can't cast more than one non-Phyrexian spell each turn. And then it has a second line of text. non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. So when you look at that, we kind of have two effects here. The first one is a rule of law-ish effect. And I think that's important. So once again, I would say this is a commanding Stax piece because it is setting a rule. You get one spell a turn. If you can't play more than one non-Phyrexian. So people now have to take a look at their cards and go, do I even have any Phyrexians in here? So that's number one. Number two, non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. So the first one is a rule of law effect, and then the second one is there's several cards that have this effect. You can see it on Thalia, you can see it on Blind Obedience, Kismet, very old card that did it, Archon of Emeria. All of these will cause Authority of the Councils is another one that comes up for me. All of these will cause your creatures to enter the battlefield tapped. That becomes very important in a format where, especially with a lot of aggressive decks, you need blockers. Sometimes Abdel is like, cool, I got 10 soldiers. Oh wait, they all enter tapped. Wait, Abdel is tapped. Uh-oh. So now that the Abdel has to figure out, how do I block any combat that's coming at me? So Phyrexian Censor is playing along two lines. One, keeping creatures tapped down, and then two, a rule of law effect.
Let me hit you with this one, Fyndhorn. I forgot to say this to kind of everybody in general. If you guys haven't noticed thus far, Puzzle really doesn't see eye to eye with Fyndhorn yet. I don't know if you guys have not noticed that yet, but I'm going to kind of make it known for you guys to notice this actually entirely, because it's relatively important to know that they're not agreeing here, and this is kind of the I don't want to say problem, but more so the dilemma that we're going to have here with each other. Because to me, what Fyndhorn is saying right now is not that far of a leap. Actually, I agree with most of everything of what he's saying. But if you notice, Puzzle's not literally at all. And I think that is pretty important to bring up. And also, too, he's not selling me on this deck. He's selling because, you guys... one of us always sell each other on the deck, right? That's kind of like our thing. Like, he sells me on a deck, whether I like it or not, we say at the end. So he's not selling me, he's selling Puzzle on this. So I'm actually very interested to see if Puzzle likes a deck at the end of this. So just throwing that out there, you guys.
So, excuse me. Taking a look at the deck, one of the important things is that if we're only getting one non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and I actually have two variants of this deck, I'm going to talk about the first one, then we have to think about, okay, well, that's a symmetrical effect, meaning it's going to affect me, it's going to affect all my opponents. So I have to be willing to do something to what we would say is break parity with what's happening at the table. So by only allowing one non-Phyrexian spell per turn, my opponents who are playing combo can't combo with, say, a Flicker combo, which requires playing multiple spells per turn, unless they deal with the commander. They would have to remove that in order to win the game. The other thing that's happening there is that they also can't develop their combo plan in one turn, meaning maybe they have multiple pieces to put into play. Like Malcolm sometimes wants Malcolm plus an Amoeboid Changeling, like plus a Reckless Fireweaver, right? So those lines become more difficult to develop because they only get one spell a turn, so they have to spend multiple turns. At which point, I'm looking at the table and going, okay, I'm holding down the combo from happening. What does everybody else want to do? Do we want to deal with this Reckless Fireweaver that's going to put a bunch of artifacts into play, ping us when it does, and then we all die? Like, can anybody deal with it? And I have stuff in the deck specifically to remove combo pieces. Things that say, for example, let me look at the exact cards. We have stuff in here that will say, like, destroy target tapped creature. Swift Response is one of those. To deal with things that are coming into play tapped, that need to go. Somebody's going to combo and win the game. But then the other thing I need to do is I need to break parity, right? Like, I need to deal with this rule of law effect. And the way that I do that is with a package of cards that very often gets thought of as not good. But that in this deck is very good. And I remember, if you've seen Common Theory episode 9, if not, go watch it, because this has been talked about before. The Rebels. So the Rebels, as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, I love Mercadian Mask's block. The Rebels were introduced during Mercadian Mask. And the thing that made them very interesting, and actually made them a Pro Tour winning archetype, like 20 years ago, is that the Rebels have an activated ability, at least a set of them. Defiant Falcon is one. Ramosion Sergeant is another. Amru Scout is another. What you can do is you can pay into that ability, depending on which card it is. It's more or less. And you can go search for a Rebel and put it into play. So, now, it's important to notice that what they say there is a Rebel permanent. So I don't just go get a creature. I could also get an enchantment. So let's say I'm playing and I'm holding down combo, and now Dargo's looking at me. Or even better yet, let's say it's Malcolm Dargo. Malcolm Dargo is going, okay, my combo game plan's messed up. I'm gonna take him off the table with Dargo. I can use a Rebel Tutor, and I can tutor up Bound in Silence, which says enchanted creature can't attack or block. In order to break parity with this rule of law effect that we've put into play, the list that I'm focused on has a Rebels package. And the Rebels are a set of cards that are often considered quote-unquote bad. Like, to look at them on their own, they don't look great. And this is an important thing about mono white, is that mono white card evaluation is not easy because very few mono white cards are broken in and of themselves. Like, some white cards are really good when mixed and paired with other colors, but when you're trying to build a mono white deck, you're focused very highly on the synergy between the cards. So each individual piece may not be powerful on its own, but when in the sum, when you accrue all these pieces together, they get very powerful and hard to deal with. So just as one example, if you're dealing with, let's say, a Dargo, you can say, okay, I have an Amru Scout in play, or maybe one of the other Rebel tutors, and you go ahead and tutor up a Lawbringer. So Lawbringer has a tap ability that lets you sacrifice it and exile a red creature. There's a sister card to this called Lightbringer, and that one focuses on exiling black creatures. So, you can put that into play with your Rebel Tutor. It's not spending a spell. You can do it at your opponent's end step while holding up mana for interaction. And then when they go to attack you, or let's say they go to combo, let's say it's the Reckless Fireweaver in play, you can sack your Lawbringer, and you can get rid of that creature. You've stopped a combo, or you've stopped an aggro threat. Some other options are something like Children of Corliss. Let's say, Gut has turned their eye toward you and is coming at you. They're coming at you strong, hits you for a bunch of damage. You can, at the end of turn or after combat, tutor up a Children of Corliss, which sacks and then lets you gain life equal to the life you lost this turn, while still not spending a spell. Now, you may rightfully say, okay, well, that's great, but you can only do that once. That's okay, big deal.
I think the Rebel package is good. I play it in the Viscopa list that we talked about. Once again, that's just kind of our disagreement on the definition of stacks and how it interacts in our format. I just see them as control pieces. I think it's really nice that they do break parity underneath a rule of law effect, which you have in the command zone, which is why I do lean towards calling this more of a Stax deck than a lot of other things, because it has a true hard Stax piece in the command zone. It has a win condition, especially the fact that it keeps creatures tapped, which removes blockers in the command zone. It's a 3/3, so it's okay at attacking as compared to the 1/4 we had before, and all these things. But I struggle to call any of the cards so far in the 99 a Stax piece.
So let me hit you with a couple of things that I think are Stax pieces in the deck, in the 99. Because that is something somebody brings up. It's like, great, you have a rule of law in the command zone, but what is the 99 doing? The first thing I'll mention is just going back to that Rebels package. The Rebels, while there's a couple of pieces in there that are definitely removal, that are definitely trying to stop certain decks from doing their thing, the majority of the Rebels are really just there as the way that I'm proactively trying to win the game. I want to close the game through combat. Similar to how in cEDH, Adeline Resplendent Cathar is trying to win, call it win conless stacks, but the idea is that I'm going to try to beat you with creature beats. I'm going to put hate bears into play. I'm going to beat you with creatures. So that's my proactive plan. And the way that I get over the top of other decks is by using anthem effects, like Steadfast Unicorn, like Ambush Paratrooper. A 1/1 anthem seems like it's not a lot, but in a format where we're not really playing the big beaters, if you will. Like in more casual PDH, people play the big beaters. Our creatures in our format tend to be very toolboxy. They're not super huge. So a 1/1 anthem actually has a lot of board impact. But getting back to just stuff in the 99 that I think function as stacks. Once again, we have a Suture Priest in here, and I've talked about how that can function as a stacks piece. We have a Stonehorn Dignitary. So for decks that are trying to win through combat, a Stonehorn Dignitary is going to stop that for a turn cycle if I flicker it, possibly two, and it's going to disrupt their game plan. And in a format where games can end, turn 8 on average, losing 1 or 2 combats can really be backbreaking for certain decks. And once again, I call that stacks because it's based in a permanent and it's setting a rule on the table. Dargo, you don't get to attack this turn. One that is underrated is even ones like Commander Liara Portier. If Commander Liara Portier can't go to combat, that's actually stronger, I would say, than a Fog. A Fog is just going to stop the combat damage, but Liara has still gained a bunch of value off of going to combat and now casting spells from exile. This is saying you're not even going to go to combat, so you're not getting any of that additional value. Similar with Gut. So that's a Stax piece in the 99. Other ones that I have in here are Standard Bearer, which we've talked about before. Certain persist combos want to win, like with Impact Tremors, let's say. I have a Soul Warden in here. So you may be able to kill the rest of the table, but you're not going to kill me this turn. We have other things like, for example, for decks like Yuri, Master of Review. I have a card in here called Spirit Link. You can put Spirit Link on your opponent's creatures. So Yuri wants to hit me for a bunch of damage, say, or wants to, when they get their die trigger, well, if I have a Spirit Link on it, it's not going to get its die trigger. I'm going to basically fog that. So they have to send it somewhere else. That's going to disrupt their game plan. I have other pieces in here that I do that as well, like a Planar Disruption. A lot of times people look at Planar Disruption as just a pacifism effect, but the other thing to look at is that it stops activated abilities. So, for example, a Dork with a Freed from the Real on it stops that. If it were to, it would also stop like activating Gretchen. Other activated abilities become relevant there too. So these are the kind of pieces that are disrupting what our opponents are trying to do. And then on top of that, I have the removal, like I've talked about, that I can just tutor up with the Rebel tutors. I also have stuff in the deck that is going to tutor up some of these interaction pieces that I've talked about, like a Heliod's Pilgrim can get me Spirit Link. It can get me Benevolent Blessing, which I can put on my opponent's creature. If Zada wants to go ahead and, go off that turn, well, if I put a Benevolent Blessing on Zada and name Pro Red, it's going to be much harder for them to achieve that. So those are the kinds of things that the deck wants to do and the axes that it plays on to try to, one, break parity with the table, and then two, globally impact the table. Why does any of this matter? So this is why it matters for me. And then Puzzle, I want to hear more from you. We're having kind of an internal discussion in our format about what the role is of different decks at the table. Like, combo is supposed to try to win as soon as it can. Aggro is supposed to try to stop combo. Mid-range is sometimes playing on both axes. It's trying to win with aggro. It's trying to stop the combo. It's trying to hold off faster aggro threats. And there's kind of this tacit assumption, well, if you're playing aggro or you're playing creature beats, you have to stop combo. And that's not always the case. Sometimes you have to stop the mid-range deck that's just going to accrue more value than you over time, or you're going to lose. So what a Stax deck like this does is it says, hey guys, I'm stopping combo. They can't do what they want to do now. So mid-range deck, I'm going at you. But I'm going at you. Which is, whoa. Like, that's not what people are expecting. They're like, you got to kill the combo player. Like, they're the threat. And it's like, well, I'm holding back the threat. So you may have been feeling comfortable that you didn't have aggro threats coming at you, but now they are, because this deck can also be very aggressive. So that's why I think Stax is stepping in at this point at a really interesting time in our format, kind of change that discussion. Okay, I've talked a lot. I'm going to stop now.
So I do think, obviously, the target for a Stax deck is the combo deck. That's what you're basically trying to shut down with your commander in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely think that's a good mindset to have, especially going into like tournament preparation, which is kind of what we're all about. Having a strong way to deal with combo is relevant. That being said, I think there is a problem with not having the redundancy of some of these Stax effects against these combo decks. For instance, if I'm playing Gretchen and I'm activating Gretchen 3-4 times a turn cycle, I'm going to find interaction and I'm going to be able to attempt to bounce your sensor at your instep, and maybe you have protection for that. So I'm going to try it on the next player's instep, and then the instep after that, and I'm just going to keep trying to do that. So I think there are some combo decks that can still play around this, but it definitely does hurt them, which is relevant. And there are some soft Stax effects in the 99. I will give you that. Suture Priest is a card that I personally classify as Punisher style, but I think an argument can be made for it to be soft Stax. It limits them to creatures entering equal to their life total -1. Unless they have life gain effects, any of that stuff, which is why I'd call it a soft Stax piece as opposed to a hard Stax piece. And I think it has a place. I'm just not sure how well it'll do, because I haven't actually seen the list ever played yet. I've known of its existence for like the last 3 months or whatever, but I have yet to actually get to see it, which makes me sad because I do really want to see it. I play Stax and cEDH. I love Stax. So I would love for Stax to be real, and I would love to be convinced that it is real.
Well, if I could throw something at the both of you guys kind of screwed us over with our next topic, which I'm not going to switch away from the deck of the week since it is, we've already been speaking about this. But our next topic, you guys, I'm going to throw this out there, was breaking parity, even though they kind of already went completely into that as it is. So not going to continue to go into that one. But the breaking parity thing was part of the next subject. But I think you guys know this by now. All of our topics really intertwine with what we like to say, and that's what makes things that we're talking about honestly very structured, even though it looks like it's not structured, because one goes with two goes with three goes with four, and they all intertwine, and that's what makes something what it is. So I'm always a big fan of that, and I never mind when we jump the gun and go from one to the next and next to the next and so on and so forth. But there's a few things that both of you guys said that I like and don't like, and I'm just going to throw this out there. The Rebel package is truly breaking parity. Something that wasn't touched upon was you do play the Suture Priest was eroded to a Phyrexian, right? If I'm not mistaken. So like that ironically breaks parity as well. I don't know if you play other Phyrexians in the list, but that was just like something I wanted to note out there. Like there are a few cards that are Phyrexians, and I believe one of the Archivists, not the Archivist itself, but one of those is also Phyrexian. So you do have a few, right? In the list.
There's a Phyrexian Archivist. The other one I have is Indoctrination Attendant. So Indoctrination Attendant is a Phyrexian cleric that lets you return a permanent to hand. So if it's the first spell that I've played that turn, and then let's say I put a Stonehorn Dignitary into play, I can return it to hand and reuse it on a later turn. That's just one example. Or I could do it with a Heliod's Pilgrim to grab a different aura that gives me that redundancy to deal with things that are at the table.
Yep.
So, and that's just one example of those effects. There's also a ton of flicker effects in here, because flicker not only gives me value to help build that redundancy that puzzle you're looking for, but it also is a way to protect Censor. So if I flicker Censor, it's going to fizzle a removal spell, as just one example.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good... Yeah, because you get to be proactive and you get to be reactive with your flicker spells, which is actually pretty neat. One thing I would like to bring up as a big point that hasn't been said yet, and I know you've said this in the past as well, and me and you've had discussions about this, is that I know, Puzzle, you brought this up with cEDH and with Stax in like a comparison notion. And Stax, cEDH does not have a Stax commander like this in the command zone. So specifically a rule of law.
Right. So, I mean, I think that is one thing that is unique to our format. One thing I actually hear from people quite a bit is they sometimes have some hesitancy about Pauper Commander, because they're like, wait, you don't need a legend? You can put any uncommon in the command zone? That could get really busted. And I'm like, well, no, I don't know. But like, this is one example where, yes, I think that could be the case, in the sense that we have a commander that has that rule of law. So I don't need to go search for it. I don't need to mulligan for it. It's there in the command zone. So when you go into that game, you are going to be playing under a rule of law effect.
Okay. What do you think, Puzzle? What do you think? Hit me, bro. Hit me. Are we speaking gibberish?
I mean, it's definitely a valid statement. I think as for being afraid of the format being way too powerful because we have non-legendaries in the command zone, Wizards has been printing legendaries for Commander for years at this point, and some of them have been uncommon, and we get sets where we have busted legendary uncommons And we've gotten so many of those with the partner mechanic and the choose a background mechanic, and just iconic, like in limited formats, they're like I can't think of the word right now, but they're like the signpost uncommons, right? And those are very commonly legendary in recent sets. So in general, the legendaries are stronger in the first place, so I don't really agree with that. There aren't very many uncommons that aren't legendaries that are also super competitive from what I've seen. There are a few, like some of the guild mages and things of that kind, but I think that's just inherent cool for the format.
It's usually something people say as like out of not really having much experience with the format, right? But they're like, "Oh, that sounds." I've heard people say that, like, "Oh, I don't know, that sounds a little spooky." But yeah, I would agree with you. I think a lot of the legends are more broken. But I think the thing that Phyrexian Censor brings to the table is, again, you got to play under this rule of law effect. I don't have to go search for it. I don't need to tutor for it. I don't need to like mulligan for it. It's there, and everybody can see it. You got to deal with it.
Yeah, that is where the non-legendaries stand out. They get very interesting and unique effects that you would never expect in the command zone. Like those guild mages, some of them, like is a guild mage, things of that nature, Phyrexian Censor. So I think they're pretty cool. I enjoy them personally.
All right, you guys. Strengths and weaknesses. So this is a big subject I wanted to bring up because it's been kind of a hot topic since I've played Pauper, kind of forever, on the subject of, are the white commons strong? Are they weak? Like, what is their strengths? What is their weaknesses? And I think because we have you here, this is like the easiest thing to talk about, because I think all of us here like white, right? So
yeah,
and I believe a few of us have some very hot takes on white. Not you, Fyndhorn. Actually, probably me and Puzzle over you, ironically enough. But yeah, I definitely think this is a big subject, and I think this is going to be another hot topic of both you guys talking about certain things as well. I'm going to throw my 2 cents out there here real quick, if you guys don't mind.
Absolutely.
And my card for this subject, and I will say this is a card that I've spoken about I don't know how many times, Angelic Purge. Angelic Purge is this. I love this card. I'm a person that likes a card that could do more than one thing. So yes, I know that this card is a sorcery, but the fact that it's exiling, getting rid of whatever I choose to target with this, that's it. Simple, clean, get it out of here. I'm done. And at a mere price of sacrificing a permanent, not a land, not an artifact, not whatever I so choose. If I'm flooding, I'm sacking a land, right? Like, this card is sauce. And I just wanted to bring that card specifically out there because I believe that this is one of the strongest cards in the entire format, which I know that's going to get so much pushback. So much pushback. But the amount of times that card has been drawn to my hand, and this is why I'm saying this. So this is the reason I am saying this, because yes, it is a hot take, but the amount of times I've top decked or I've had that card and it's been able to answer one of those 3 items when I needed to and won me the game. And that's with me playing it in Gut. I've tried it in Abdel. I've tried it in a variety of decks. It did not work in Abdel like I wanted it to. It did win me a game, but it did end up getting the cut from there specifically. But there are certain decks where it's just so easy to play this card in, and it's not even a consideration.
mono white though? None of those decks were mono white.
Whoa. We swapped to strengths and weaknesses of white cards, which I do think, if I could throw it at Fyndhorn for this statement, is white a strength of white? If I could hit you with maybe one of your first topics, quote unquote, is it not one of the best, if not the best support color? Maybe Puzzle might yell at me for that statement, but we'll find out.
Well, I do think it's the strongest support color because so I'll have a hot take. I think white has some of the best permanence in our format. And so there's a pro and con with that. So because it has some of the best permanence, many of those you have to play on your turn. You're playing at sorcery speed. That's part of how white plays. Some people don't want to play that way. They want to interact with the stack. They want to do it, on somebody's end step, something like that. The effects that you get at instant speed typically are not going to be as strong as some of the effects that you're going to get that you play at sorcery speed. So like when you mention an angelic purge deals with literally anything. Like that one spell can deal with multiple problems, right? But I like using permanence especially in mono white, like Journey to Nowhere or Oblivion Ring, because these are very efficient. They are very well costed, and most importantly, are going to synergize with other things I want to do in the list. So one of the things that mono white likes to do in cEDH and in other formats is play a lot of enchantments that are going to bring up your enchantment count to help with things like All That Glitters, or to help with cards like, we have it in our format, Ethereal Armor. I want to get a beater, and I want to hit you with it. It's got protection from red, let's say. I'm going to throw an Ethereal Armor on it. I'm going to look and say, I got 5 enchantments in play. Now it's got +5/+5 in first strike. That's going to become hard to deal with. So I get an additional synergistic benefit from playing some of those permanents. As a support color, sometimes you don't play those specific permanents that I just said. You maybe play Angelic Purge, or maybe you play other interaction stuff like Stave Off. Though I would say Stave Off can go in any white X deck. That being said, I think it has some of the best permanents in our format because, as I just mentioned, like the Rebels, like cards that you can have an activated ability to just tutor up anything that you need. That's a very strong ability, just as one example. Cards that have activated abilities with an anthem for your whole team when you already want to go wide, that's a very strong ability. I think we sometimes underestimate the power of activated abilities because we look at them and go, that costs so much. Then you get to like turn 6 and you're like, wait, I can pay for it. Yay. Everybody gets +1/+1 vigilance. It's actually a very strong effect. Some of the Stax pieces I've talked about today, like Suture Priest and Standard Bearer, those are really strong effects. So yeah, I would say it's a great support color. I would say probably the strongest. But mono white itself also brings something unique to the game, and we can talk about that if you want. But Puzzle, what do you think?
I think white is a very strong support color. I've said it before. I don't think it's the best support color. I think black is the best support color, personally. But I think white has very strong cards, especially like Stave Off, like you mentioned. Probably one of the best cards in the format. Not Angelic Purge, but Stave Off, probably like top 10. And yeah, they do have a lot of good permanents, especially the enchantment suite, and having cards like Heliod's Pilgrim to tutor them. And in colorless, you have Shrine Steward to tutor for Benevolent Blessing specifically is another card that I think is one of the best cards in the format pretty easily. Just instant speed, permanent-based protection, or interaction is so insanely powerful. And I think another thing that white gets is, for mono white specifically, I actually think they have some very powerful commanders. I just think mono white struggles with the card quality. Not card quality per se, because obviously the card quality in white is actually pretty high, which is kind of like one of their things. Just the way the commanders function doesn't work quite as well in our format, I would think. Like, I think Bastion Protector, just a 3-mana 5/5 indestructible, in mono white is pretty good. Magnanimous Magistrate has like some of the craziest text I've ever seen on a mono white card in the command zone ever. And I built that deck and it just kind of sucked when I played it. It was just too slow because I just didn't have the ways to find the combo pieces. But if mono white gets ways to find combo pieces, that deck's probably insane.
So just to throw a couple of things out there. So one of the things that I think mono white gets that helps it in that area, like finding the combo pieces, we don't necessarily always get tutors, though worth mentioning is the fact that we did get Mirror Kinsmith, which lets you grab Crib Swap, is another really efficient form of removal in white. We do get a lot more of these effects, and this is important because it's really only been the last like 18 to 24 months. A lot more of these like ETB draw card effects.
Yeah.
So when we're looking at like a mono white build that wants to like take advantage of those ETBs and combo, and this is not a list we're talking about today, I would look at mono white Abdel. If you and I maybe could have a part 2 discussion where I talk about how mono white Abdel I think actually is terrifying for Gretchen, probably more so than Censor. But that deck, because it can leverage so many creatures that ETB and draw a card, or artifacts that ETB and draw a card, you're going to chew through your deck very quickly. It has not been unusual for me to chew through like half my deck playing Abdel, because you just flicker Abdel, you flicker him again at end step, you have 3-4 things that are drawing you cards, you just draw until you get what you need and win the game, all while putting up a bunch of blockers or attackers. So that's a mono white build that I think is definitely very strong. It's not the first one people go to because they look at Abdel and they go, well, I want Abdel blue. Rightly so, or maybe another color, Abdel black. But mono white Abdel is one that I think has strong combo potential, probably more so than Magnanimous Magistrate.
Yeah, Abdel's just a busted card, so yeah. I can definitely agree with that. Chris, you want to start talking about some weaknesses? You got any weaknesses?
So this weakness, and I'm actually going to bring up something you said about support colors. If I'm looking at mono white and I'm looking at mono black, this is going to be a really weird one, and I hope you guys could follow my thought process here, because I'm kind of going to go on left and right field here. Black and white actually, in my opinion, suffer from the same issue. And because you brought up black specifically, Puzzle, I'm going to just throw this 2 cents. If they're individually, now, there are exceptions for almost every rule in all of Magic, which, if you don't know that yet, dig really deep into Magic. Every card in Magic breaks a rule of some sort. So, but historically, mono black has a problem with closing the game. It's just inherently slow. And mono white also has that same problem. It's inherently slow. But I will throw this out there. Even though they're inherently slow, if you have the right pilot, and I know we say this all the time, Puzzle, and I think people are going to get annoyed about this soon, the deck can get there. I don't see why it can't get there. The cards are strong. The cards are powerful. If you know what you're doing, just like in a game of chess, where you read 2 turns, 4 turns, you're supposed to read 4 to 5 turns ahead. But if you're able to read that far ahead, you're going to get there. Like, I don't see how you can't get there. If you're like, okay, so I'm going to get this. I'm going to play this ambush paratrooper. I'm going to end up turning this. I'm going to untap. Doesn't matter what I draw. I'm going to pay the 5. I'm going to put it into this. I'm going to dedicate that. I'm going to you. You may do one of 3 things. In those one of 3 things that you do, I have this in every outcome. Okay, boom, 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 boom. And now I could take this deck to a tournament because I'm able to know my lines, my outs, and what I'm trying to go for, right? And the weakness is not that it is weak. The weakness is maybe we don't have someone who's going to dedicate themselves to mono white. And the irony of that is we are literally talking about this with someone who has essentially taken up that mantle for our format and literally why they're here with us. So with that said, I do believe there does come some territory with that notion to be presented soon. So I do think some of these will rectify themselves over time, but that's kind of something that our format is starting to have happen with these certain players becoming this with the certain thing, playing it more and more and more.
I think the best thing about playing white as a monocolor is that every decision you make matters. I think the worst thing about playing mono white as a white as a monocolor is that every decision you make matters. So what I mean by that is, like, the way the cards are going to play out, just like you described, I have this in hand and I know it's going to answer this and this and this, and I'm going to play them in this order and it's going to work. When that works, it's awesome. And like, you're playing all these little dudes all over the place, like little creatures, and like enchantments here and enchantments there, and they on their own they're like but like together they're like really hard to deal with. Everybody's like, how did this happen? When you screw up, when you make one bad decision, you go, oh no, I did that wrong. I'm gonna lose the game.
Yeah.
And it's that one decision, and so you can look back after the game and go, I messed up that one thing. It's a very unforgiving color play. So when you get it right, it's like, yeah. When you get it wrong, it hurts. The reason I play Magic is because I want to know that my decisions matter, and that the way that I'm playing is going to get me there. So that's why I like it as a monocolor. I like that aspect of it, but it's not for everybody, and it might sometimes not be like the first thing you should go towards when you come into the meta. Just kind of the way that I approached it, because it's the way that I'm interested in playing Magic.
Well, it is very unforgiving, like very unforgiving. So I do think that is difficult for new players overall. Puzzle, I got a question for you, because I think that kind of wrapped up everything, and I really want to throw this 2 cents at the end because I think it'd be interesting. We'll start with you, Fyndhorn. If you could pick one monocolor, just one, of the format as a whole, what do you think is the best monocolor? Like, if you were going to take a monocolor deck to a tournament, doesn't have to be a name deck. You just say this color. I would take this color of a deck to a tournament tomorrow. What color would you take? Would it be mono white?
Yeah, I mean, tomorrow I would be trying Phyrexian Censor. I would be trying mono white Abdel. Absolutely. Okay. And not just because I'm trying to meme on the format, because I think it's going to get to the top 4.
Okay. What about you, Puzzle? What do you bring? Monocolored.
I would probably go mono red or mono white.
Mono red or mono white? Really?
I would lean mono red, but if I have to play monocolor, I'm leaning towards Dargo Kedis or mono white Abdel.
That is not what I was expecting you to say.
I was not expecting that either. I was expecting blue.
Well,
yeah.
I don't really like any of the commander options in mono blue.
Yeah.
Aside from Scholar, which I don't like. I don't like playing Scholar at all.
Okay. So I would also play mono red. I think mono red, like, is just so good. And I know that is not a popular statement. So if you guys don't agree, please hit us in the comments below. We do have reasonings for this. Ironically enough, I did not know that that would be Puzzle's answer. So it's kind of funny that he said that. But I love Mono Red. Part of the reasonings behind Mono Red is that it ends the game quickly. And it can end the game. That is the other thing. It can definitively end the game. The way you build the deck. Doesn't matter what you're putting up there. It's getting there, right? But regardless, anything else you got for us, Puzzle? You got any other questions? Any other debates you'd like to have? Or what do you got, man?
I think I'm out of topics. You got anything, Fyndhorn, you wanna mention?
Nothing else really to bring up. Mono white is just a color that I think is great. I think check it out. If you're interested, hit me up in the Discords. Stax is a viable thing in our format. I know not everybody's going to be convinced of that. That's fine. But I do think it's something that you can play and that I think plays on an interesting axis, different from a lot of other archetypes in our format. And you should check it out.
Yeah, so whether or not you guys believe in Stax, the deck exists. So
It's there.
deal with it. I'll go ahead and close us out here then, if you're all out of things, Chris.
Well, my last question, actually. I got one more. You said it. You said it yourself. The deck exists. What did he win you over? Or did he not? Like, where are you now? Because we never told him what you were initially about. And I know, I don't know, I think you should say it instead of me. It'll kind of better, from the horse's mouth, right? So let's hear it, my man. Tell him your initial and then what you are now.
I mean, obviously, like I just said, the deck exists. I do think the deck is viable. I will say that it is a Stax deck because it has a Stax piece in the command. I still struggle to call a lot of other decks Stax, probably, for the most part. I would just call them control decks. Just a little bit of a quirky form of control with some permanent base control, that sort. I don't want to call it Stax personally. But for Exeon Sensor specifically, I can deal with calling that one a Stax deck.
Okay. You're like 50% of the way there is what I'm hearing. Like 50, right? Like that's about what I'm hearing.
I think there needs to be at least one hard Stax piece in the deck to call it a Stax deck.
Yeah, I get that. So, but if you, yeah, I get what you're saying, for sure. But, well, with that, man, Puzzle, take us home, my bro.
Alrighty, thank you all for watching. Make sure to hit up Fyndhorn if you have any questions, or leave them down in the comments. I'm sure he'll see them there too. You can find us in all the Pauper Discords. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already. We'll see y'all next time. Yay.
Dude, did you hear that he left your yay in the last one?